Welcome to the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book.
And then see the movie.
I'm Luke.
And I'm James.
And this week we discuss Madeleine L'Engle's 1962 science fantasy novel, A Wrinkle in Time. Now let's test her across the universe. So we've read Wrinkle in Time, and I have a lot to say about it. How about you, James?
Yeah, it was a fun journey. I'm glad that I read this novel because it's something a little different than our normal stuff. We've done some stuff similar to this, but it was a fun story.
Yeah, it's nice to get back to kind of a YA, more wholesome. Reminds me of our House Moving Castle coverage we did, for sure. Before we actually get into it, just at the top of the show here, I wanted to mention that I have a short story that was just published in Metaphoresis magazine. You can find that by going to Metaphoresis online and finding their website, or you can look on our Twitter or Facebook page is where I've shared it. And I just want to point it out because I'm proud of it, and I'm hoping people will go read it. So if you're a fan of this podcast, maybe go check that out.
Yeah, definitely check it out.
Make sure to stick around for the end of this episode. We're going to be telling you how you can get a copy of Ready Player One. We're going to be raffling off two copies of that novel, and we'll tell you how at the end of the episode. So let's also talk about the way that this episode is going to go format-wise. I figured what we'd do is we'd start off with a little bit of biography about Madeleine L'Engle, and then we'd go into our non-spoiler thoughts. We can talk about some of the concepts, so that might be lightly spoilery, but we won't get into plot details. We'll just talk about some of the concepts that are getting introduced in this book. And then we'll move into a more spoiler section. But even in there, we're not going to do our typical scene-by-scene breakdown because we just don't have enough room and time in this episode to do that. How does that sound to you, James?
Sounds great. This story has a lot of twists and turns and a lot to try to describe, and it would be a lot to try to fit it all in one episode because we are doing this book coverage in one episode.
We could have devoted 2 episodes to this, but it just didn't work out with our schedule and getting it out around the time that the movie's out and everything. So, James, what is your experience with this novel and with this writer? Had you heard of it before this movie? Anything like that?
No, I mean, I honestly hadn't heard of the material before I saw that Ava DuVernay was adapting a film of the same title, and I feel like I've heard of the title of the novel before, but never really. I didn't even know that it was like a young adult fantasy sci-fi type thing.
Yeah, I had heard of it. I'd seen it around. It's been on my to read list because it's considered a classic, right up there with it's like a proto Harry Potter type book almost, because it came well before, but it's this beloved YA, fantasy, science fantasy it's called, and it's an interesting blend of multiple genres. And so yeah, it'd been on my radar, but yeah, I've also never read it until now. So we've both just read it for the first time. So Madeleine L'Engle is really interesting. We both listened to the audiobook, and in that you get a description of her life from the point of view of her granddaughter, and she seemed to be really interesting. And I really liked a lot of the discussion about how difficult this book was to publish for her, and how she got rejected for over a year through her agent, and so much that she asked for the manuscript to be returned, and kind of ended up handling it on her own. How much of that, was that stuff interesting to you? Is that just more of a writer thing?
No, man. I mean, I find in any sort of art, I find processes and ways that people get stuff done and lengths that artists will go. I always find that stuff fascinating. And to hear that she approached publishers and they kept telling her that it was too advanced for children and too childish for adults. I thought that was really interesting. And I like that idea that she was look, it's for kids and kids want to be challenged. I thought that was all cool to hear of how she finally got it published.
Yeah, and that seems obvious nowadays, whereas that seems to be kind of the mindset of the YA genre. But back when she was writing this, it wasn't, and it's funny to hear that she wrote this book that even when she did finally get it published, it was unknown whether or not it was going to be successful. It was this big risk that they took on, and it ended up winning awards and being well received by audiences for the most part. But then I think it's also interesting that the book got banned from schools and banned multiple times, and that it ends up rankling a lot of people for being too religious on one end, and then on the other side being, new age and mysticism and witchcraft and all this stuff, from the other end. And so a lot of people got angry about the book too.
It's definitely an interesting, it's kind of got those religious allegories and stuff going on in it. So it's definitely one of those things where as I was reading it, I was like, ooh, I'm sure that this group of people wasn't very happy about this being in the book. And like, it just seemed like it was somewhere caught in the middle, like you're saying. Yeah,
and it's going to be kind of a litmus test for your own belief system as you read it. Because if you're like me and you're a little bit more science-minded, a lot of the more overtly religious stuff was like, okay, so she's taking this to be kind of a very Christian story in its like heart. But I can also see a very Christian person who resists science, like a very conservative Christian, seeing this as an attack on Christianity by introducing all of these other forces and all these other worlds and this big cosmology. And so I just think it's funny that, you can kind of if you choose to be upset about something, you can find it in here, I guess, as a parent or even.
It's cool to see that, like, from different viewpoints, the different viewpoints that people will have within groups, because just because somebody is Christian doesn't mean that they can't like enjoy these kinds of stories and like I feel like she seemingly was Christian, right, from what I gathered from this story.
Yeah, she was Christian, yeah.
So I assumed that like this was like kind of her take of like, it was like I don't want to say like a send up, but it was like her making allegories to her religion with all of this story that she was setting up. So it's like you could walk in and look at this story as like, oh, this is blasphemous or whatever you want to think it is, but at the same time she's probably drawing parallels to the things that you believe in if you believe in the Bible.
Yeah, and so getting back to her process and stuff, I there was a bit in there that stuck out to me where she would read the story to her own children as she was writing it. Like, she'd write a chapter and then like that night she would read it to her children.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah, and they loved it and like wanted to know what was going to happen next and were super into it. And so that was like, I think, gave her the strength to stick to her convictions about the story, that it wasn't too advanced for children, because she kept getting that sort of criticism. And she was able to say, well, my children were super into it, so I'm going to stick with it, And so that's pretty cool.
That is cool. I thought whenever they said that in the little beginning portion there, I was thinking about how feverishly she must have been writing to keep her kids like satisfied with the story every night.
Yeah. And we learned that the story seed that launched this was her thinking about the three, I guess we call them the three witches. I don't know if that's fair to say.
Yeah. I was the three W's, because they all start with W.
Mrs. Who, Mrs. What's It, and Mrs. Witch.
I saw that online somewhere, so yeah, and I thought that was fitting.
Three W's, yeah, I like that. Okay, we can call them that. So yeah, the three W's was like the story seed for this, right? And everything grew out of that. Which I think, I don't know. As a writer, I always think that's interesting to know, like, what the initial idea was.
Yeah, definitely.
I guess since we're gonna do non-spoilers here first, I wanted to get your take on who would you recommend this book for, and I guess also if you had children, which I know you don't, and I don't either, but if you did, would this be the kind of book you would give them and say, hey, you should read this, or even read to them, or whatever? You know what I mean? It's
funny because like I read a lot of YA growing up, and it's like there's a certain amount of fondness to this type of writing that I have, and I feel like it has something to do with like it's just so it goes so extreme in like a wholesomeness and like a pure sense. Like it's very like the stories are simple, and like a lot of what they're trying to say in the story is on the nose. But there's something easy to read about it. It's kind of like just putting on a show that's easy to watch. So anyway, with that being said, I would recommend it too if you're interested in this kind of literature. If you like YA stuff, go ahead and read it because it's a pretty fun read. But more specifically, I think it is definitely geared towards a younger audience, like children. And I would definitely read this to a child if I had one,
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I don't have children either, but I can imagine that if I did, that I would read this book to them, but I would have to stop because I think there's a lot in here that needs context, maybe that hasn't aged very well, and that I just think I would like to provide context for a child if I were to have it. Particular, there are some, I think, some potentially problematic, I don't know, like there's this hyper focus on like personal appearance that keeps rearing its head early on. There's a lot of weight given to things that just, I don't know. It just doesn't, I don't know how well it meshes with like my modern sensibilities. And so I think for some of that, I would have to give a modern context.
There's definitely like a couple of things here and there that I think are, something you would need to talk to a kid about and make sure that they understand. But I mean, things like the appearance stuff, I think that it was kind of all just setting up like an adolescent child who is insecure about that kind of stuff. And then we kind of get a sort of payoff at the end. Without giving spoilers, we get a payoff. Like it's kind of a build up to a payoff, but like you say, it's definitely something that you would definitely want to tell your kid, like it's okay to be an individual kind of thing, and not worry about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we can get into more of the specifics. There was a few times that it just didn't quite work for me, but I can get into that. But what I think is the more important thing to point out is that this handles some really heady scientific concepts that we're still talking about today. Now, I'm no physicist. I'm just someone who has always been fascinated by that kind of stuff. And so I watch a lot of YouTube videos, listen to podcasts that talk about this kind of stuff. And I was really pleased with how well they were able to describe concepts that are very difficult to explain. Yeah. And, like the Tesseract and stuff like that she gets into, like real concepts that, are still being discussed by whether it's Carl Sagan or Neil deGrasse Tyson now, are still really interesting things to think about and talk about, and fourth and fifth dimensions and stuff like that, and I think that stuff is all really cool, and I love the idea of introducing a child to that early, because then it's something they can grow up thinking about and being interested by. I think this is a great book to give to any kid who seems interested in science at all, or at least to even like see if they would become interested in science. Something
I was going to say that kind of piggybacks off of that is, going into this material, having seen trailers of the film, I thought that this was going to be like pure fantasy almost. Like I thought this was going to be like very much in the vein of like a pure fantasy YA, like a Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, that kind of stuff. And then we get into it, and there's a lot of like things based in science, and it's very much like bringing, like you said, any kid who's interested in science would definitely like respond to this, because there's a lot of like actual theories and things to think about in there. Specifically, the Tesseract is something I want to talk about later, because the explanation that the 2 points and then you get the 2 points closer together. I mean, we should just talk about it now.
Yeah, let's talk about it now. I think it's not super spoilery. It's a conceptual thing, but it's not a plot thing. We won't tell you how it's used or why it's important, but we can talk about it as a concept and how it's explained.
Right.
So go ahead.
This concept is, and I'm sure you've seen it in a movie before, because this is part of my point. And this was written in the 60s, so this is definitely ahead of the curve. Yeah. But it's this idea that the closest distance between 2 points is a straight line, but that's only if you're in 3 dimensions. So if you break that out to fourth and fifth dimension, you get into a situation where you can bend those 2 points closer together, and where they're touching, and pierce a hole through the fabric of whatever it is. And just basically transport there. And that's what the idea behind the Tesseract is in this. And it's been explained in tons of movies. And I'm just wondering, at what point is this something that like people crafting the story don't have to, like, when is this going to be common knowledge? When is this going to be something that people are so familiar with that like they, as soon as we mention, because of the 2 point thing, I've seen it at least like 24 times in movies.
I see what you're saying. I think we're probably approaching that time now. I expect, although it depends on your audience, especially if you're writing for adult audiences, it is starting to become pretty. But it's like you also don't want to alienate people who don't understand it. But I think more than just a method of travel, conceptually, it's really interesting to think about fourth and fifth dimensional spaces. And there is a point in which they talk about a 2-dimensional space in a really interesting way, and how, limited their ability to function is in that setting.
That was really cool.
It's really cool because that serves as a metaphor, or like not a metaphor, a comparison point for, you know, thinking about fourth and fifth dimensions. And you might say, like, what's a fifth dimension? And this is the whole point. Fourth dimension is, you know, we think of as time, right? And so you have this cube that also has a time element to it, and that's a four-dimensional cube. But fifth dimension is literally basically a dimension that we can't conceptualize. And the difference between, like, you know, if you were a two-dimensional being, a third dimension would be a dimension you can't conceptualize, because you couldn't imagine a situation where something had volume to it. It would be beyond comprehension, because that's not your reality. And for us, if we are three-dimensional beings with a possible fourth dimension of time, a fifth dimension is something that's you really struggle to imagine, but it's because we're not faced with that in our day-to-day. So yeah. I mean, there's a lot of stuff you can do research on about this, and it feels to me like there's a lot tied up in, like, if we can figure this stuff out as a race and as humanity, there's so much that we're going to be able to do with it. If we can really figure it out. Yeah. I don't know if it's possible, but it's really interesting stuff. Something
that always comes to me when I think about these dimensions, and it's always fascinated me as well, is so two-dimensional space is completely flat, right?
Yeah.
But on that flat space, you're able to form a seemingly three-dimensional shape, right? Like, you can draw a sphere, and it's bending. It's like because of perception, right? It's not necessarily because of it's not actually a three-dimensional shape, but it looks like it's three-dimensional.
No, a sphere would look like a line is the thing. Like, it only would look like a sphere if you had a third dimension to look down upon it.
Right. But I'm saying, like, if I took a piece of paper right now and I drew a cube on it and I did the shading correctly and everything, it would look like a cube on a two-dimensional space, right?
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
So what I'm thinking is, this is always something that I've just thought about. We're in a three-dimension here. Is there some sort of fourth dimension element that we are able to we're not able to see exactly, but like perceive? I guess that has something to do with our like knowledge of time and the way that we function around it and stuff. I don't know. It's just been always something that I've thought about, because it's like, what if you could create like a fourth dimensional, I can't think of the word of it right now, but like some sort of fourth dimensional object or something, not object, but something that looks fourth dimensional in the third dimension.
Interesting. You are making me think of, now this is going to go way over our younger listeners' heads for this episode, but I'm thinking of True Detective Season 1, where Russ Cole is describing time as a flat circle.
Right.
And this is exactly what you're talking about. He's talking about how if you could separate yourself out into a fifth dimension and look down upon time and everything within it, you would see it as an extant thing that is, you know what I mean? Like, that there's no escaping. And he kind of talks about the inescapableness of it. But you know, you can look at it as a thing that exists in reality as its whole. And I think that is kind of what you're talking about. Like, right. If you could somehow view it, you could almost draw it as a you know what I mean? Like, this is it. This is a thing.
Yeah.
And it's time. And you know what I mean? So, like, I don't know. I don't want to linger on too long, because, like, literally I could spend all afternoon talking to you about it.
Yeah, to tie this back into the stuff we have here, some of the themes that go on in this book are giving the imperceptible things in life, like just because she talks about a lot about how, like, even though there's certain things that you can't physically see, there's these things that exist and they are real. And just because you can't see it and perceive it doesn't mean it's not real. And I think that's really cool. That's a lot of what we're talking about right now. And I mean, within this story, love, and I think for whatever reason, whenever we talk about dimensions, love ends up being something that comes up a lot, just because it's like this imperceivable thing that exists, but we can't, you know, it's not tangible.
Well, I think that's tied a lot into the religious element of this book. And we often see that reflected in pop culture. A lot of more progressive religious thinkers often will think of love as like a force in the universe that opposes hate and that kind of thing, you know? And I think that's definitely prevalent in this book. And yeah, it's interesting because it does come up a lot. And you know, it's almost unfair to really compare this, because this is, like I said, you know, we've said it's a 1960s novel. So honestly, this is kind of more of a precursor than anything. But yeah, and when you compare it to all these other things that have come out, like that is kind of a well-trodden ground in our pop culture.
Yeah. All right. After all that, I think we should just hop into like overall thoughts. Okay. And I guess I'll start. I wanted to say that I like this story a lot. We've talked about some of the things that we felt weren't necessarily as modern as they could have been because it is an older story. But I liked it, and I thought that the concepts of love and like specifically the thing that I want to mention is like the finding yourself in this and the individuality. And like I said before, a lot of the stuff could be seen as kind of on the nose, but like you see a lot of uniformity in certain parts, and then you're seeing the intellect being like rivaled by love, and what can happen with pure unemotional, like calculated knowledge versus like emotion and love, and what that can do with knowledge, like if you can wield both of those things. And I think it had a lot of cool things going on in it.
I like that. I like the idea that, because this book is a book that champions intelligence, which I loved about it, and makes me think that I would have enjoyed it as a child too, because I was that bookworm smart kid who felt like the world didn't understand me, that kind of stuff. And I like the idea that this book champions intelligence, but you're right, it does temper it also with the idea that the intelligence needs something to it. It needs an emotion, it needs a morality. And it seems to kind of say that you have to have both, right? At least to be a, quote unquote, good force in the universe to oppose the shadow, So yeah, I like that read of it. So far I've more focused on my objective thoughts about this novel in the landscape of literature and being a classic novel. But I think if I want to delve a little bit more into my subjective thoughts about it, that I recognize are very personal, I did have a few issues with it. I did find that I felt like you can tell me if you think I'm wrong, but it felt to me like these children were swept up in a story, and that story pushed them around. Like it felt like they didn't have a lot of agency, which is something I really like in my fiction, to feel like the characters aren't just following a plot sheet and that they can really affect the story. And now there's a few times where you could say that isn't, that they demonstrated some choices, but overall, it felt the plot felt a bit suffocating to me. It felt like they weren't able to do things of their own volition. And do you understand what I'm saying with that?
Yeah.
Do you get what I mean?
I actually agree with that. I felt that a little bit, but I did feel that early on. And then, like you said, that a lot of the stuff that they actually had their own agency and were doing things to affect the plot was happening late in the game.
Yeah, pretty late.
And so I definitely agree with you. Like that I can totally see that.
Yeah, and it's funny because like agency is kind of an illusion anyway when we talk about it, because of course you have a plot as a writer, and that you're in, and you can talk about maybe the organic process of letting plot grow from the characters as you write, and that can do it. But ultimately, it's all kind of an illusion anyway, right? If that makes any sense. So it's more just about how it's presented. And it felt very much to me like it became difficult for me to really root for Meg and Calvin and Charles Wallace until like late in the game, like you said, because it didn't feel like they were making a lot of choices that were like, oh, that's an awesome choice. I'm going to root for this character because I can see the way they think, and they've made this awesome decision I can really get behind. It felt more like they were just going along with it for like a lot. And I think that could be a potential problem in the movie if they follow that same formula,
Yeah. This just came to me since you were saying that stuff. I agree with you, but I'm thinking about it in relation to YA fiction and like how a child would read a novel. And I feel like it might be easier for a child to get on board with something that just whisks you away and takes you along for the plot. And like maybe that has something to do with it being a YA novel. Yeah. And I'm just playing devil's advocate.
That's definitely, and that's why I said that the thought was very subjective.
Right, yeah.
I totally get that someone may read this and not think of that at all. Or as if I had read it as a child, it might have been something I even noticed. It's just where I'm at. I'm a 32-year-old man reading this. You know what I mean? I'm old and jaded, and I've read, a lot of this kind of fiction, and so I'm going to bring it to it a different thing than a kid, which is the target audience. Is people, they've said, 8 to 12 is the target age range for this novel, and I think that's going to be where you're going to get your best meeting of like you've talked about, the kind of more simplified themes, that don't have a lot of nuance to them, but that's really going to connect with people that age. I think it's, and it's not, I'm not trying to discount it if you read it later and enjoy it. I think that's perfectly valid, but I feel like when you read something like this as an adult, part of the enjoyment is kind of putting yourself back into the mindset of when you were that age, and things were more pure, and things were more simplified, and that can be comforting and nostalgic. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It's definitely a good point. And I also agree that I hope that the film has, I feel like there might be a little more in there, but I hope that there's a little more agency to the characters, where it's like these, and I feel like with strong voice of like an Ava DuVernay, like, I don't know if like, I feel like her characters will be definitely affecting a lot of what goes on. But just thinking about that movie, it looks really cool. It looks like a lot, like it's going to be a fun ride.
For sure. And we're going to cover that next week. So, come back and join us for that. But I think that's enough for our non-spoiler talk. I have definitely some spoiler thoughts. So I'm ready to get to that if you are.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Before we do that, I thought I'd take a moment and do a little creative spotlight here and tell you about Mabel the Lovelorn Dwarf. Mabel Goldenaxe just doesn't fit in with the other girl dwarves, and she likes it that way. To please her father, and encouraged by her older brothers, she goes to work in the emerald mines. Still, she dreams of a better life, and becoming Gilliam's top axe-throwing champion just might be her ticket out. Mabel is torn between her love of sport and her love of the elf Aramis. But loving an elf is forbidden. Dealing with her overbearing family, jealous friends, and deep family secrets, Mabel will have to summon all her strength to conquer her fears and become her own dwarf, lovelorn or otherwise. So this is a trilogy of books by Sherry Peters that is they're YA fantasy, and you can get them right now for $7.99 through all ebook retailers. It's a complete series. The 3 books are Mabel the Lovelorn Dwarf, Mabel the Mafioso Dwarf, and Mabel the Notorious Dwarf. Sherry Peters attended the Odyssey Writing Workshop and holds an MA in Writing Popular Fiction from Seton Hill University. She graduated before I arrived there, but, a fellow Seton Hiller. Her Mabel the Lovelorn Dwarf and Mabel the Mafioso Dwarf were both shortlisted for the Aurora Award for Best YA Novel. Mabel the Lovelorn Dwarf won the 2014's Writer's Digest competition for self-published ebooks in the young adult category. And for more information on her, you can visit her website, which is www.sherrypeters.com. That's SHERRYPETERS.com.
Yeah, that sounds like a fun, lighthearted fantasy. That's really interesting. If you wanted to check that out, go ahead and buy it. It's available.
Yeah, all major ebook retailers, $7.99 for the complete trilogy. So yeah, definitely check that out.
Yeah, speaking of young adult fiction, we actually wanted to take a second to talk about Audible as well. Audible is an audiobook app where you can listen to any of their huge collection of audiobooks. They've actually been nice enough to give us an affiliate link. It's audibletrial.com/ink2film. And with that link, you're able to get 30 free days and 1 free audiobook in their collection.
Absolutely, man. And yeah, like you said, if you are looking for something you can share with your children, maybe you don't have time to read them a book. Well, Audible can do it for you. They have all kinds of YA fantasy and sci-fi in there. I know Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which we mentioned earlier, all the Harry Potter books, Hunger Games, that kind of stuff, depending on if your kid's a little older, maybe. It's all in there.
Yeah, we talked about Howl's Moving Castle, which is also an audiobook on there. And that was an episode that we did prior that we thought was a great young adult story.
For sure. And yeah, you can get one of those books for free right now by signing up through audibletrial.com/ink2film. You're going to get that book for free. You're going to have free 30 days before you'll get another credit, which is another book. So every credit equals 1 book. So, keep that in mind. You also can cancel at any time. So keep that in mind. But yeah, if you use that link to sign up, audibletrial.com/ink2film, you are helping us out, which helps us keep the lights on for this podcast. So we'd be much appreciated. All right, so we are full spoilers now. I thought let's focus on the beginning here. We are introduced to our main character, Meg, her brother Charles Wallace, who's, I think he's 5,
Yeah.
if I'm remembering that correctly. Precocious little child. And then we eventually meet a boy named Calvin, who's a little older. Her mother, and we learn that her father has gone missing. Both of them are scientists. And that's kind of a lot of the early tension in this novel is Meg is, acting out at school and having a rough time adjusting to her father not being there. And everyone who she interacts with seems to chide her and kind of like mention that her father's run off to be with some floozy and all this stuff. And she, doesn't react super well to that. And then, her life's turned upside down when we meet the 3 W's, as you said, Mrs. Whatsit, Mrs. Who, and Mrs. Which, who inhabit this haunted, quote unquote, haunted house over nearby in the neighborhood. And those 3 women speak to them individually, talk about a tesseract, which is something that her parents were studying, we find out, and then are swept up in a journey. And the 3 W's take the children through a tesser, I guess, or a tesseract, and transport them across the universe.
Early on, we there's a couple of things to hit on. There's her little brother is like weirdly intelligent and like well beyond his years. There's one of the W's, Mrs. Whatsit, shows up at their house like randomly in a storm, and then she like tells her mother to do a bunch of stuff like cook food or make food, make a sandwich or something, and like take her shoes off and all this stuff, and her mother does it without any question. And like she seemingly has powers too, because she like they like ask her if she wants something to eat, and she knows that they have like a certain food or something in the cabinet. But she has this weird kinship with the little brother Charles, and it's kind of just, it's already like putting you on your it's like catching you on the back foot, where you're just like, okay, so this is like, you need to suspend a lot of disbelief like right off the bat.
I also, so a couple little things I wanted to mention here at the beginning. The book, I don't know if you noticed this, but the book starts with the words, "It was a dark and stormy night," which I thought was really interesting, because I'm like, okay, this is it is the ultimate cliche, right, in storytelling. And what's funny is I don't know when I realize I don't know when that began. Like, when did that become the ultimate cliche? Was it a cliche that she was knowingly starting with as like sort of a thumbing your nose thing, or maybe she thought it would be recognizable for a young audience, like a safe entry point? You know what I mean? Like, even children have heard it was a dark and stormy night as the start of a story, and maybe they would recognize that. I don't know.
That's a good point.
Did that even stick out to you at all?
I know it. I didn't even notice that. That's pretty funny though. It's definitely an.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it when that was the first line. I was like, really?
Yeah, I mean, and an author's going to put a lot of stock in their first sentence or something, because that's, they're supposed to hook people early on. So it's funny. It would be interesting to know where she was within the, being self-aware of, if she was being self-aware, or if it was kind of the time.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a problematic thing, in my opinion, that goes on with her kind of demonizing this quote-unquote tramp who's come into town. Now, it ends up not being him who's behind anything. But he's like the boogeyman early on, like this, I get, tramp being like homeless, some sort of traveler that has come into town, and he's the boogeyman. Like, she's afraid he's lurking in the shadows with a knife and all this stuff. And, I don't know. It's just not very empathetic, I guess, to our homeless population. But like I said, this is a different time. So, some of this stuff is going to be in there. And like, I guess I'm drawing it to your attention if you are an attentive parent who's worried about what might be in a book. I don't think this is a reason not to read it, but I think it might be something that's worth discussing with your kid if they do read it.
Yeah. Oh, I should also mention the two other W's. Mrs. Who speaks in like quotes from like famous works or whatever it is. Yeah. And I thought that was really cool, that like the way that she would like say something in a foreign language, or say a quote of some like really great quote, and then translate it for the kids. I thought that was really cool. And then the final W, Miss Witch, is the one who she doesn't show herself, right?
Yeah, she's not fully formed. Right. She's like more like an apparition.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting that like each of these W's had their own like quirk and were something interesting, and we come to find out more about what they are later, and it kind of puts it into a certain viewpoint.
When you talk about, I think you mentioned earlier, Charles Wallace, this precocious child, it really is like he is described as having a mind that works differently, and he can like hear the wind talking to the trees and all this stuff. And he's almost this like little chosen one child. And I liked that even though he almost seemed like the main character of this book, he's not. It's Meg. You know what I mean? So I like that too. Like she's almost the Watson to his Sherlock, you know, because like he knows more than she knows. But then he tells her things. And he seems to be a lot more with it for like what's going on with these 3Ws than she is. Or even Calvin. All right, so they travel across the universe and they arrive at a planet that we learn is called Uriel. And it's said to be a safe planet. And we learned that the 3Ws have taken them there to reveal some things to them. First off, they reveal their true form, I guess, which is kind of this centaur Pegasus creature type hybrid.
I don't know if it was their true form, but it was like a form that they took on.
Form, yeah.
But yeah, it's like this. There's like this angelic thing going on with them.
Yeah, and so they climb onto the Mrs. What's Its back, who is now this, and they fly, and they see a bunch of other ones of these creatures, and they're singing this like religious hymn. We learn, and they travel past them, and they get to the summit of this mountain. And at some of this mountain, they turn and they're able to see what is basically called like the shadow, the thing, and it throughout the novel. Doesn't really have like a given name. It's just kind of a thing, which is funny because that's something we have encountered many times in our reading adventures so far in this podcast.
It's the thing and it. So basically, it's the thing from another world, and it's Pennywise.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know about you. I kept imagining it as Pennywise at times, and I was like thinking about this crossover between Stephen King and this, and then I knew it wasn't, but it was funny to think of it that way. So they learn of this darkness, which is sort of I think of it kind of more like Sauron from Lord of the Rings or something. Like it's this force, it's this like dark energy, and less personified than that though. It's just like in darkness. Right. Well, and apparently it's a force in the universe that is like takes over planets and makes them terrible.
Yeah.
And this is the first we learn about it, and we learned that Meg's father is fighting it somehow, and he's missing because of that.
Yeah, it's basically just like this. It is like pure evil. It's like this embodiment of evil, and it hurts them to look at it for too long. And I don't know. It's pretty cool to see this juxtaposition that they go through on this planet really quickly, because seemingly that the thing, the darkness, is like heading for Earth as well at some point. So that kind of is what's setting up.
Well, we find out later that it's on Earth already. It's like surrounding Earth already. It has been there for a long time, she says.
So and then the juxtaposition between this religious, like beautiful wonderland where they're singing hymns and there's all this like biblical, like seemingly scenery, and then we turn and see like the most evilness cloud of like death and destruction.
Well, and I think that's kind of the religious part of this. It's a very monolithic good versus evil. And in the sense that this is the eternal struggle, right? This is something that's been going on for all of time. And it's good versus dark. It's light versus darkness, all that stuff, right? And they're now caught up in this, and it involves her father and the earth. So it makes it personal for the characters, which is good. Next, they travel again, and Mrs. Witch makes a mistake, and they accidentally travel to a two-dimensional place. And this is what we were alluding to earlier that I thought was pretty cool. And I like how like her organs don't work, like Meg's organs like don't work right. She can feel her heart beating like sideways or something. And they get them out of there before they die. But it was really cool how it was like a three-dimensional being is not made to survive in this place, which is a fun concept to think about. I've actually like watched videos about this sort of thing. It's interesting about how our bodies require a third dimension to work.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, what's crazy is that, like, I guess it's the science or the magic that they have going on in the story, but like human in a two-dimensional space is gonzo. Like, you're not making it out of that. There's no period of time where you like, oh, your heart's beating sideways and stuff. But it was cool to see, because like she was saying, like her lungs couldn't fill with air, and like she was like definitely dying, and they pulled her out of there quickly. And then she kind of the Mrs. Witch apologizes for taking them there, because she can't. This corporeal form is something that she can't perceive as much. Or something like that. Like she doesn't think in that dimension. She doesn't normally think in like a third dimension.
Right. So this is also all setting up these concepts, right? This is like an example of what they're talking about when they're talking about 2-dimensional space, 3-dimensional space, 4-dimensional space, 5-dimensional space. And it's giving us examples. And so even though it is a plot moment and a near death and kind of like a harrowing moment, it also is, I think, setting up the ideas of the novel, which is cool in that way.
Yeah, and it makes it attainable, and like it makes it so that a child could understand what's going on.
Right, which it does a great job of explaining this in a way that a child can follow. So next they arrive at another planet, and this is kind of a planet where I don't know a lot about it other than there is a medium there who has a crystal ball, and they consult with this medium, and the medium is able to show them things. And they see Earth, which is showing the battle, its battle with the darkness. They are told that a bunch of different figures throughout history have fought against the darkness, like Jesus prominently is one of them. Other religious figures, Gandhi, and then thinkers too, Albert Einstein, and the famous Renaissance thinkers. So you also get the idea that like intelligence and free thought also opposes the shadow. And that all these people, maybe unknowingly, have been fighting this shadow that's trying to, swallow the earth.
I really like this part, with the idea of like these warriors, everybody throughout the years who's important, not even necessarily important, but just like these free thinkers and these people who do think, because like Gandhi was a person who very specifically just tried to leave the smallest footprint possible and do good unto others.
Yeah, and it's funny because I feel like this also could be one of the parts that is most contested by people.
I felt that for sure.
Because it takes all these different people and it lumps them all together. And if you know what I mean, from whatever side you come from, you might not like that. You might not like Einstein being lumped in with Jesus Christ and saying they're fighting the same fight.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like someone might not like that. But then also if you're Buddhist or if you're, a Muslim or anything like that, like you might not like this other implications, right? So it is like, it's funny because like I get it and I think it works for the story, but I can see also how people might not like this part at all.
Yeah. That's something that when I read that like Jesus, I was like, oh wow. So she's willing to say that Jesus is like one of the, because I felt like maybe it was just all going to be like allegories, but then she was like, no, specifically Jesus was one of the people fighting against this darkness. So it's not even in the context of like the religion anymore. It's more of just like these people doing the right thing. And I do think it's cool that, like I said before, you can see the viewpoint of just like a Christian doesn't necessarily, if you're a Christian, it doesn't necessarily mean you're not going to like this book. It's like she was Christian and she wrote this story that she felt was, doing the right thing, entertaining people, and it also is like staying true to like her religion in her eyes. So I don't know. I think that's cool to see.
Well, she was a very science. We learn, especially later in her life, she really got into reading physicists and their description of how the universe works. And she was able to unify that with her religious views. And I think this is the result of that, right? Like this is how she views these two coming together. So I think in that way, like it's authentic for her, and I think it has connected with a lot of people. So yeah, absolutely. So it's also revealed here that the three W's have some pretty astronomical ages. It's said that Mrs. Witch is like over 3 billion years old. And we learn that's because they are all former stars. And that they basically fought against the darkness. It's unclear if they all are no longer stars, or if that's like an alternate form. I know, I think Mrs. Whatsit, was said to have given up her star form in the fight against the Shadow. I don't know how it all works, and the book doesn't really explain it very well, but that was my impression, that these beings were once stars. Does that sound right to you?
Specifically, for sure, Mrs. Whatsit sacrificed herself for the cause.
Right. Her previous version of herself, I guess. So how did you feel about them being billions of years old?
I mean, I thought it was pretty interesting. I didn't expect it when they said that they were billions of years old, but it kind of, these figures throughout the whole story are pretty mysterious. And then, I mean, even leading up to the end, there's something that happens at the end that I was like, yep, seems about right. And then,
yeah, the billions of years old thing, to me, I just had to not think about it, because I think that in and of itself is a concept that is impossible for us to fathom what life like that would be like. And this book kind of takes it with a kind of a wink and a nod. Right. I think, it's like you can't take it too seriously.
Well, neither are they, seemingly, because they don't see time. Yeah. Because they say specifically in our time they would be considered that many billions of years old, but they are these beings that can utilize the fifth dimension and stuff. So maybe time is a flat circle to them, and they can jump in and out and do all the things. So
yeah, like I said, it was fine. And I think this book isn't about that, but it's just a cool thing that gets dropped. Right. You get the idea that they're these forces that are almost godlike and almost angels, almost something else. They're somewhere in between all of that. Right. So the next big thing that happens is they go to another planet, which, tell me the name, James. I know you said it better than me.
Kamazats.
Yeah, Kamazats. There they find a bunch, a town, and they're left alone. The 3Ws can't go with them, and it's this planet that's in the darkness. Once they're there, they go into these different neighborhoods, and everything is super similar. And there's people who are bouncing balls in the exact same rhythm, and everything is like a mirror image of itself. And that was really interesting, and we don't really know much about the society, and they even say, are these robots or are these people? I don't know. But they travel into the heart of the town. They eventually get to this big building that's the Central Intelligence Building, and in that building, they meet a man. This man has glowing eyes and a light that hypnotizes you, and they combat with him. And in a really interesting way, where he's reciting multiplication tables at them, and Charles Wallace in particular is throwing back Mary Had a Little Lamb, and seems like words and songs and rhythms that to counter it. And they have this back and forth, and then they get offered food, and somewhere in there the hubris of Charles Wallace takes over, and he thinks that he can combat this thing by letting it in, because his mind was keeping it out, and he tries to do this, and then he gets taken over essentially, and he becomes this doll version of himself that talks in really creepy ways and says oh dear sister, and I like that. That was pretty cool. It was very it was very creepy.
Mm-hmm. So this battle here that goes on with the logical math, and then the creative nursery rhymes and all this stuff, is kind of what I was talking about before. Yeah. With the clashing of knowledge and emotion and analytical systematic stuff and creative ventures. And I thought that was really cool, because there's obviously for the first half of the novel we got the sense that knowledge was really important, and all of this a lot of the stuff that the W's talk about and stuff is kind of based in their science. They're just so advanced that they're well beyond us. We can't understand it. And part of this journey is Meg having to just accept, because she likes to be able to understand things. And it's kind of just that she has to accept that these things are going on, and she won't necessarily understand them, but she has to accept them. And then I think that kind of lines back up with the love thing, where it's not physically there, you have to believe in it, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I also thought it was a cool. It's someone who's always been into that kind of stuff more than I've been mathematical and that kind of thing. I like that idea of those two opposing areas of knowledge kind of being at war with each other. So little possessed Charles Wallace takes them to see Meg's, their father, and this is the first we see the father, and he is suspended in this cylinder, and he's frozen, and he seems to be at war or in pain. And while they're there, Meg realizes that if she puts on the glasses that were given to her by one of the 3Ws, I think it was Mrs. Who,
Yeah,
maybe?
Mrs. Who.
Yeah. She's able to pass through the border of this cylinder and actually get to her father, kind of wakes him up, and together, using the glasses, they leave. And when they come out, Charles Wallace is there, and he's like upset that they've done this. And the father tries to get through what's going on with Charles Wallace and talk to him. They end up following him, and he takes them to this domed building in town. And in that dome building, we meet the Thing, It, the Darkness,
Pennywise.
But no, it's actually, and it's funny because it reminds me of Futurama, is a giant brain. And this giant brain, being in its presence, has this like rhythm to it, and this like, it's like a way more intense version of that man that they talked to earlier. And they try and combat it, and it's like a losing battle. And Charles Wallace goes up to it, and his mouth is agape, and he's, becomes one with it almost. And then the father has to use his skill of tessering to get them out of there. And he like pulls them out, and they escape. And Meg almost dies, actually, because she's almost, just completely absorbed by this force of the Thing. And so they flee, and they go to another planet. And this planet was super cool because it was a very like gray, drab planet. And these weird creatures walk up to them as they're like coming to, and they have like tentacles for hands and fingers, and they have 4 arms, and they have like tentacles for hair. And, they're these big, weird creatures, and they're terrified of them at first. And then they have a conversation with them mentally. They have no eyes, very importantly. And we come to find out that they're a race that doesn't see. And because of that, like color and, visual descriptions don't matter to them, and they have to find this other way to communicate. And they help heal Meg and kind of bring her back, and then eventually the 3Ws show back up again, and we move into the end here. But I just want to take a second and talk about this planet because I think it was really interesting.
Yeah, the planet is really cool. It's this idea that like this idea of like your perception of things are changed by what you're able to see. So Meg gets into the situation where she's communicating. Oh, they're able to communicate with these other creatures because Calvin was given the gift of communication from one of the W's. So they're communicating with these other beings that they can't speak their language or anything, and they're having to find ways to communicate. And so she realizes that like she can think of things in their essence, and she kind of thinks of the W's and the way that they make her feel and the things that they've done and what they mean to her and that kind of thing. And like thinking of their essence seemingly like summons the W's to her, to like her aid and stuff. And I thought that was really cool like moment. And
well, it was also a way to communicate with these beasts, quote unquote, which one of them ends up getting called Aunt Beast, which I thought was funny. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's just a lot of great allegories in here because they have this exchange where they say, what would you do as humans if 3 of us just showed up on your planet out of nowhere? And Calvin's like, we'd probably shoot you. And they're like, well, maybe we should do that. And he's like, no, I'm not saying it's the right thing and all this stuff. And I think it's just interesting to think about. Like, there's a lot of in there about like things being different than you and hard to understand, and the idea that you would be afraid. And that'd be your first reaction, but maybe that's not the right reaction, right? Which I think is also interestingly tied to our previous project, but I won't get into spoilers about that, right?
Yeah, our previous project being Annihilation.
Yeah, very different project, but there's interesting overlaps in these science fiction type ideas.
Yeah, something else that I really liked about that, like a message that was trying to be portrayed in this, and I think was portrayed in this planet, was the idea that everything is gray and drab, but there's still like some beauty in it. So like the food tastes amazing.
The songs are described as like amazing, and the food they eat is like the best thing they've ever tasted, even though it doesn't look like anything.
Right. So there's a lot of that. Like you don't judge a book by its cover, that kind of thing.
Well, and I think it also ties into the dimensional talk because it's like our reality is only the things we can perceive. And if no one in your reality can see, visual stuff means nothing to you. And so if you think of it, like if there was a 6th or 7th sense, right, and we don't have access to it, but another race does, it's impossible for us to even know what they're talking about, right, when they're trying to describe something in that they're perceiving in that way. So this, I think it all ties back together, and it has a nice symmetry with the dimensional talk and puts it in a very like physical way. I also wanted to talk for a second about the other planet where they just fled from. I think there's also a really interesting kind of authoritarian allegory here, where they talk a lot about how the fear and the danger and the pain of existence has been given up to the thing, and in return, these people have a orderly, rhythmical life without any aberrations, and there's a safety in that. But that safety in this book, at least, is perceived as evil. And there's a lot of talk about, like, in order to feel happiness, you have to understand unhappiness. And there's a lot of, like, approach of, the extremes of existence being a part of what it means to be a human and what it means to be alive and what it means to be a free-thinking individual. And that free thought, rather than having your thoughts told to you by an authority figure, right, is the way to go. So there's like some nice social commentary in here too, which it was very like 1984, like, I don't know, just like that kind of stuff I thought also struck home pretty well.
Yeah, I agree. This was like the uniformity that I was talking about with like the idea that they're approached multiple times. They're told, like, if you just give up and like give into it, it'll be easier for you. But it's like, is that easiness? With that easiness, you're giving up your free will, the chance to do creative things and like making your own happiness. And I think it's interesting because in a little while, well, I'll get into it here in a second because it's in the final part here.
Okay, so the final thing that happens is Meg convinces everyone that she needs to go back and rescue Charles Wallace, who was left with the thing. And she also realizes that she's the only one who's able to do this, for various reasons. She's able to convince her father, who doesn't want her to go, and convince the three W's to send her back. And so she's sent back, and she travels back to the dome and back to the thing, and she comes in, and her brother's there, and she is told by Mrs. Witch that she has something about her that the thing doesn't have, and that's like the key. And she's like thinking, what could that be? What could that be? And then she finds that she hates the thing, and she's like, could it be that? I hate it. And then she realizes, no, it knows hate. It's like a thing that's full of hate. But she realizes that her love for her brother is the thing that it doesn't have. And so, like we were talking about at the very beginning, true love, you know what I mean, kind of triumphs over all, which is it's like a well-trodden thing in pop culture, right? And it has been for a while. But in a children's story, like, I can see the appeal of it. And ultimately, it's her love for her brother that overcomes the evil and is able to free her brother from its spell. And then they flee, or they leave. They travel back to Earth through Mrs. Witch, which then we get a little bit of wrapping up a story. And then that's the end of the book. Basically, the witches disappear, and they very, leadingly say, like, we'd stay longer, but we have to, and then they get cut off or whatever. Right. So... that's the end here. So let's talk about this final bit.
So what I was talking about a second ago was the uniformity and the things that were going on, and the way that you're giving up your free will, and like it's easier that way. And soon after that, Meg, when she first shows up with the brain to get her brother back, in order to combat the pulsating, like, mind controllingness of the brain, she's like reciting the Declaration of Independence. And so it's like very, again, it's on the nose. It's independence versus your authoritarian situation that's going on. But it's cool to see that where she's fighting back with the pursuit of happiness, all of the things that allow you to have free will and free say, and you can pursue these things rather than have them given to you.
There's also something that's said by her father before she leaves that I really liked, where he said they talk about sonnets as like the form of poetry that's very strict in its form. Has a strict rhyme scheme, and it has very specific stressed and unstressed syllables and all this stuff. But within that, you can literally write an infinite. Well, I guess not literally, but you can write almost an infinite number of poems within that form. And so I liked this idea of, like, even if something has structure and it has form, it can still have freedom. and it can and that's kind of like what the human existence is. Like, you have a very particular form, you have a life, but within that you have freedom, even if it does have to fit a shape that is like a preset shape. And I thought that was a nice little bit of like philosophical nugget to kind of think about.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I like the stuff that like I said before, I like as much as they're not hard to find, I like a lot of the stuff that this book has to say.
Yeah, it's a lot of heady stuff especially for a kid, but I think that's what like is going to stick with you. Like, if you're a kid, like, this is going to be the first time most likely you're being presented with a lot of these like ideas that most people don't really think about until they're older, right? And so I think it's really cool in that way. Like, it's able to distill it and talk about it in a way that I think like children can identify with and follow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So at the end, I don't know if I said this enough, but yeah, everyone's reunited. The father's back with his family. They all embrace. The dog runs out and is all excited. The twins, who I thought were going to be bigger characters but weren't, are excited. And everybody's reunited at the end. So we get that kind of like happy ending. And then I don't know if you had the same part in your audiobook, but I had a part where it talks about how there are more than one book. Like, there are follow-up books to this that follow continuing adventures of Meg
and there had
stuff,
to be, because this is something I wanted to mention real quick, was this is a happy ending to the story, but there's still a brain that's controlling an entire planet of people, and like in an authoritarian situation, like
they just kind of escape it.
Right,
is all
so
that happens.
nothing's
They don't
been
defeat
defeated.
it, actually,
like the darkness is still there. So rightfully there's sequel books, but I mean, yeah, it was a fun ride. Something else I wanted to mention was the W's all show up at the end, and they're like, "Oh, we would stay longer, but we're on another mission, so we got to get out of here." And they like don't even finish their thought, and then they like shoot away and disappear.
Yeah. So another sense that there's like there's more going on, right? And so I like this thing at the end. We already talked about a lot of the stuff that we get here, but it's the granddaughter of Madeleine L'Engle talking about her grandmother and her life, and talking about how difficult it was to get this manuscript published and all of that. And then the thing that I wanted to bring up here is talking about these later books and how she continued to face backlash from her readers, because she, in later books, Meg becomes a lab assistant for her husband, Calvin, from this novel. And Calvin is kind of like, you know what I mean? Like, he's the scientist and she's an assistant, and she focuses more on raising their 7 children they have. And so she essentially is kind of like a stay-at-home mom. And Madeleine L'Engle got a ton of upset people for this decision. And her response was interesting, because her response was that, you know, if we're going to champion feminism and the right for women to hold jobs like scientists and so forth, that she felt we should also champion the right for women to choose to be homemakers and raise their children, and that's a valid choice. And as someone who, my own mother was a homemaker who didn't have a regular job, and she just raised us, but was still like a really strong, intelligent woman. Like, I think that's a cool, like, I like that, and I can see why people would get rankled, but I like that she kind of championed that as a valid life path.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, people should be able to do anything they want to do.
Yeah, and like I could see her writing a story in which Meg goes on to become like a Nobel laureate scientist. And I think that would be a perfectly valid way to do it. And I don't even know that the way she did it was better or worse. It was just the way she chose to tell this story. And, maybe it sounds like I'm on the fence about it, or that I'm taking the middle route, but I'm okay with it. Like, I'm okay with the way she chose to tell it, I guess. But that doesn't mean that's going to be true for everybody.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, well, I don't think I have anything else for this spoiler section, unless I know we kind of breezed through it really quickly, but that was just, limitations on time. Do you have anything else you want to talk about for A Wrinkle in Time, the novel, before we see the movie next week?
Not really. I think we covered everything. I'm excited to see the film. I'm really hoping that it's a good ride. Looks fun.
So before I tell you about that book giveaway, I want to just tell you we also started a book club on Goodreads, which is just the Ink to Film book club. And you can join that if you're on Goodreads. and we post different threads there where you do a discussion about the books that we've covered, or the films that we've covered. And we've already got over 50 members on there, so it's growing pretty quickly. Come on over and join it, and join in the discussion. It's been a really cool new thing that we're getting into.
Yeah, it's definitely really exciting.
All right, so as we mentioned in the beginning, let's talk about this book giveaway. We are partnering with the Crown Publishing Group to give away 2 copies of Ready Player One. And they are the tie-in version, so they have the movie poster basically as the cover. So brand new versions of this book. That's our next project, and we're partnering with them to raffle these off to our listeners. And the way that you're going to be able to get a copy of this, or get a chance of getting a copy of this, is we're going to have one for Twitter, and we're going to have one for Facebook. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a post, and that post is going to have the descriptions of the contest. And then you're going to, if you're on Facebook, like and comment on the post, and that will enter you into that giveaway. And if you're on Twitter, you're going to like and retweet that post, and that will enter you into that giveaway. And you can enter into both if you do both. That can be found on our Facebook page or on our Twitter account, which are both at Ink to Film.
Yeah, I'm really excited to bring our listeners some fun stuff that they can win. I can't wait to hear that one of our listeners got a free book that we're going to be covering. It's going to be a really fun experience.
Yeah, it's going to be cool. So the contest is going to run for 1 week, and that actually is going to have started by the time you listen to this. But that's okay. You have a week to enter. Don't worry about it. We're going to start on Tuesday, and we're going to run Tuesday to Tuesday. Get in on it now. Get a chance. Get a shot at getting it. And we're hoping to do this more in the future. This is really exciting for us. So we were hoping that you guys will enthusiastically participate. If you already have a copy of the book, go ahead and enter, because you can get another one. You can give it as a gift. You can give it to someone who hasn't read it. You can sell it on eBay, whatever you want to do. You might as well enter it. It's free. So yeah, we're excited for this, and we hope you guys are too.
Yeah, so you can find that on our social media right now. It's going to be on our Facebook and our Twitter. All right, guys. So in addition to reaching out to us on social media, you can also reach out to us and give us some feedback. Anything you want to say about the show, or anything you'd like to tell us. Let us know what you think of A Wrinkle in Time the book, or A Wrinkle in Time the movie. That Definitely,
sort of thing.
Yeah. Any thoughts you have on the way we covered it, anything we said. If you're excited for the movie, let me know, because I am. And anything you can think about for Ready Player One coming soon, go ahead and send that to inktofilm@gmail.com.
Absolutely. I also wanted to shout out our Spotify listeners. We recently had a surge in downloads from there, so that's exciting. If you're listening to this on Spotify, thank you for that. It's been great.
Yeah, definitely share that around. If you listen to Spotify, or people who listen to Spotify, we're actually in the arts and entertainment featured section now, so it was pretty exciting to see.
Yeah, that was really cool. I don't know how long that'll last, but yeah, we got a screenshot of it. We're on that page. Really exciting. Also, if you don't listen to Spotify, that's fine. However you listen to us, make sure you subscribe, like it, give us a rating. That kind of stuff really helps us to spread the word and get out there and continue to grow, which is our goal. All right, I just wanted to thank Sherry Peters again. Her book, Mabel the Lovelorn Dwarf, and that trilogy can be got for $7.99 on any ebook realtor. Make sure to show her some love and go out and get that novel, or those novels.
Yeah, and we also wanted to say thank you to Ross Bugden for the use of our intro and outro music. And also thank you to Audible. Audible's given us an affiliate link again. It's audibletrial.com/inktofilm. And with that, you get your 30 free days subscription and 1 free credit for any audiobook in their collection.
Yeah, and I also want to thank Crown Publishing Group, which provided those titles for us to give away. Oh, also, we might have some more stuff to raffle out, so make sure to pay attention to our social media, because we will, I should say, have some more things to raffle out, and you can pay attention to how we are going to do that. So check that out for sure.
Yeah, definitely follow us on all those pages.
All right, well, I think that's it. I think we've covered all of our housekeeping. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing this movie, which, by the way, James is going to be in Portland when we go see this movie together. So that'll be exciting. And yeah, we're looking forward to that, and we hope you join us. Until then, I'm Luke.
And I'm James.
See ya.